Live boxing.
And welcome back to 5 Live Boxing with Costello and Bunce. A year late, the Olympic Games are getting underway this week. We're taking the opportunity to look ahead and to wander back in time to remember our standout moments from the Games. In terms of my experiences, Steve, the timeline dates back to 1992 and Barcelona and Oscar de la Hoya and others, and yours is pretty similar.
Yeah, mine's 1996, although I did, if you remember rightly, we did hatch a plan in our innocent heads that I would somehow get to Barcelona and kip down on your bed. How days have changed, eh? The idea that no worry, we'll be able to swag a badge from somewhere. I'll be there in a moment. Leave the key under the mat, Costello. I'm coming to watch it. Hey ho, 96. I'll tell you what, Mike, that was the Olympics that everyone's forgotten. How many gold medals did the GB entire team win in 1996? You know the answer. How mad is that? You have to whisper it. 1 gold medal. The entire Olympics. And that's for the boxing. Don't even get me started on that calamity.
Yeah, there's a terrific series on BBC One at the moment, Steve, called Gold Rush, about 1996 and the 1 gold medal and what happened afterwards in terms of lottery funding to do something about that grave situation. But as far as the boxing is concerned, we've been hearing from various members of the GB squad in recent weeks, and today we'll hear from 2 more of Britain's medal contenders, Ben Whittaker at light heavyweight and Siobhan Clarke at heavyweight. Also this week, a stunning fight for the undisputed super welterweight title, which ended in a draw at the weekend. Jamel Charlo and Brian Castaño in an epic in San Antonio in Texas. And Fury vs Wilder 3 is now on again, rescheduled for October the 9th. And Joe Joyce is returning to action this coming weekend at Wembley Arena. So there's this Olympic and amateur boxing pedigree thread running right throughout this week's show. And Steve, as I get set to head out to Tokyo, I'm flying on Thursday. This is a strange one. I don't know how you feel about it. Like many broadcasters from around the world, you're doing it from your home country rather than going to Japan. As far as I'm concerned, we're recording this as ever on a Monday. I've taken my first PCR test today. I've got another one tomorrow, Tuesday, a third one on Wednesday. They've got to come back negative for me to be able to fly to Tokyo. When I get to the Games, apparently it's a 3-hour process to get through the airport. Then I've got 3 days of hard quarantine in the hotel where we're staying. And from there on, I've got to supply a 14-day plan to the authorities. So it's pretty much like the athlete's whereabouts plan, which they have to undergo throughout their careers, whereby I have to tell the authorities for those 14 days who I'm going to mix with and where I'm going to be. So in simple terms, I can leave the hotel, get into the official car that takes me to the athletic stadium, to the stadium, back in the car, back to the hotel. And that's pretty much all I can do for the duration of the Games. So that wipes out for me, Steve, for the first time since 1992, my first Olympic Games in Barcelona. That wipes out the prospects of watching any boxing. One of the joys for me, I know I've covered athletics at the Games, but in between sessions, morning and evening sessions sometimes, or for example in London, the men's marathon was the only event on the final day of athletics, the Sunday. That was in the morning. I went across to the XL in the afternoon and saw Anthony Joshua winning gold. I usually get to see some boxing, some early boxing before the athletics gets underway. I've told you the story of watching Miguel Cotto being beaten in his first contest in Sydney back in 2000. So that's what I'm really going to miss, Steve. But, you know, I'm heading out there for a reason to cover the athletics, and it's going to be so different. I don't know how you're feeling about doing it in this kind of detached state as you're going to be doing it with Jonathan Overend doing the commentary.
Well, we've got to be a little bit careful here, because there will be some people listening to this going, oh, look at him complaining about having to isolate and get in a cab and go and watch the athletics. Well, so we've got to be a little bit careful about that. All I'd say, Mike, and I'll tell you this now, from the bottom of my heart, I'm gutted. I'm sickened. I'm not there. Even under those really serious and understandably serious conditions. In Rio, Mike, I was doing a tally up earlier on. I did 11 sports for the BBC. And I'm going to hold my hands up. I'm not a master at wrestling. I'm not a master at golf. But boy, oh boy, I had some fun in the mornings before the boxing started. 11 different sports, including, I think, live commentary on about 5 or 6 of them. I must admit, the faces on the gymnastics team, the presentation team, they were not particularly pleased to see me come up and take a position as if I was going to steal their thunder. But by the way, I did steal their thunder for about 5 minutes. Got a great story from Athens. Because that's the thing about the Olympics, Mike. Mike, a lovely little seg. You've always got a story. It's like, and I say to you, okay, Mike, I need 30 seconds on 2000. I need 30 seconds on 2004. Give me 10 seconds on something in 2012 and not on your actual sport. And it's a doddle. The Olympics are just a gift that never stops giving if you're inquisitive and if you're all over it. So I'm sick I'm not there to do this live. I'm sick I'm not there to end up at the taekwondo, to end up at the diving, to end up at the synchronized swimming, to be somewhere out on a road course where I see someone on a bike, I think, every 16 seconds. I'm sick that I'm not out there doing that, Mike. But the good thing is that we will have on Five Live, this sounds like a plug now, it probably is, we will have myself and Overs through the night, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 a.m. all of the action, featuring all of the British boxers, and I would imagine the Irish, and I would imagine some of the best Cubans and the big Uzbek, and one or two of the other odd stories, because that's the thing, Mike. You just come up with a million trillion stories. I mean, I think Mary Com's there. She's about 57 years of age. I think she's a grandmother and she's still a medal hope, the Indian flyweight. I mean, I interviewed her 20 odd years ago and she was about 17 and she was this really fragile little waif-like character. Since then, she's become the most successful female amateur boxer in history. Mike, it's a relentless story of medals. It's a relentless story of sacrifices, and add to that relentless story and people will be telling it in 10 or 15, 20 years time, just like I am now. They'll be talking about the Tokyo delayed games and the COVID restrictions, because Mike, and one thing you're not saying there is how serious it is, and how just like that, boom, like a door slamming down in a dungeon, it could all be over for anybody, whether it's you, whether it's a cameraman, or whether it's the absolute nailed-on favourite for the super heavyweight division. If he's out because of a COVID glitch, he's out. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, and we've also heard of tests being returned positive by certain members of certain teams on arrival in Tokyo, and those who've been in contact with other passengers on flights who've also tested positive. So it's a very difficult landscape that I'm entering into, Steve. And there was no complaining in what I was spelling out earlier on, merely stating the stipulations that are in place. But, you know, while we're here, let's talk about some of the standout moments in our time back at the Olympic Games. And one of mine, in fact, a couple of mine, Steve, go right the way back to the first Olympics. And maybe because it was the first Olympics, but there are more reasons than that. In 1992, Oscar de la Hoya was in one of the finals. He was in the lightweight final against a German called Marco Rudolph, who'd beaten de la Hoya in the most recent World Championships, which had happened just before the previous Christmas in Sydney in Australia. So there was this great revenge mission, but he'd also spoken about his mum dying very, very young and how he wanted to win a gold medal for his mum. And when he did win in the final, he bent down on a knee and looked up to the heavens and made the sign of the cross. And it was a really emotional moment, but it was on the back of a brilliant performance, Steve. And that was my first ever boxing commentary at that Olympic Games. And one of my cousins, Sean, reminded me that when he listened back to the commentary, there was one round, Steve, and they were doing 3-3s at the time, when I managed to get through 3 minutes without mentioning a single punch. And I think a lot of commentators will understand and will resonate with this in the sense that I was so worried about drying up that I had this forest of information in front of me, and you were gonna get it, whether you liked it or not.
Hey, there's a lot.
I was so stressed and so nervous about it.
There's a lot of that going about, Mike. Trust me, as you know. It just, anyone thinks they can get behind a mic because they're decent talkers and read facts and figures. I mean, you can have a man stretch it out the ring, and there are certain commentators that still be giving you his shoe size and his sister's maiden name, hey-ho, as they say in the trade. Now, I think about, to go back to Amir Khan there, Mike, I was with Taz, Amir's uncle, who was one of the guys you always saw in the ring with him after his professional fights. I was with him last week. I went to see a young pro called Hamza Shiraz, who's boxing this weekend on that Joe Joyce undercard. a place called the Hoddesdon Boxing Club, Hodbox, which is got 107 carded amateurs, Mike. You ever known a club with 107 carded amateurs? That means they've got a card. That means they're fit to box. They've passed the medical, seen a doctor, and they're ready to box. Anyway, I was sitting with Taz the other night and Hamza Shiraz and his dad and about 15 other guys. And Taz reminded me of a night that I changed the mood completely and nearly ruined their Olympics. Amir had already bashed up the young Greek kid in the first round. And in the next round, so that was like the stage of 32. So he was still miles away from the final. He was drawn against the current and reigning European champion Dimitar Stilianov. I think he was the number 2 seed at those particular Olympics. And I remember we were sitting around in this place. We found a halal place to eat, so we're all sitting around. And Taz reminded me of what I'd said. He said, I'd stood up and said, look, fellas, it's been a great run so far. He's 17 years of age, Amir. He can come again. Don't worry. You know, Beijing's only 4 years away. It'll be perfect. It'll be 21. He'll still be younger than the Russians. He'll still be younger than the Kazakhs and the Uzbeks and the Cubans, trust me. And they said, why'd you say that, Bunce? I said, because I'll tell you for why. I said, in the history of GB boxing, I gave it a bit of welly, son. I said, in the history of GB boxing, no teenage boy at the Olympics has ever beaten a current European champion, and Dimitar Stilianov is the hero of all Bulgaria. As much as I want Amir to win, Stilianov's brilliant. I've seen him. He's this, he's that. And they said they were laughing at me. Buncey, don't worry, you'll get past him. And I went back to my digs, and I tell you the kind of place I was staying in Athens, Mike. I had 7 single beds in my room. 7 single beds. It was that type of quality hotel. I was always concerned that the guy at the desk, who really was called Kostos, I'm kidding you not, I'm not doing stereotypes here, I was really concerned he was going to rent out 1 or 2 of those single beds in an evening, but hey ho, he never did. So I went back to my 7 single bed room in a lovely part of Athens, and I remember thinking, there's no way he beats Dimitar Stilianov. Anyway, the next night, 37-21, and Mir bashed the granny out of him, never lost a second. And Stilianov, I thought in the first round was going to quit. And I saw Taz afterwards. I told you, Buncey, I told you. I think I gave up making predictions on Amir Khan that night.
And sometimes I remember around that time, Steve, it wasn't just the boxer, it was the nation, wasn't it? And Bulgaria was seen as one of the strongholds at the time, because you only had to go back to 1996, so 2 games before that, when Serafim Todorov beat Floyd Mayweather in the semi-finals. I know it's a decision that Floyd Mayweather still screams about, but Todorov went on to the final on that occasion. But didn't Amir Khan then go on, Steve, either in the next round or in the semi-finals to face a Korean? Because I remember, similar to you, saying, the Korean's going to be much too strong for him. That Stilianov suited him. The after-timer in me said Stilianov suited him, but the Korean will be much too strong for him.
Well, I nicknamed the Korean Grandad because he looked about 407 years of age. No word of a lie, Mike. He was the hardest thing I've ever seen. And Amir stopped him. Not only stopped him, he bashed him up. Then in the next round, he fights the Kazakh, who's the reigning Asian champion, who I think was definitely the number 3 seed, Serek Yelenov, and he smashes him 40-26. I mean, these are massacres. But what's really interesting, Mike, and it happened in the final with Kinderland, is that in that third round, in minutes 7, 8 and 9 of Amir's Olympic reign that year, because I still call it a reign, he had everybody running. Kinderland was running for the hills in that last round. Yelenov was doing the same thing, and Sub never made it through that round. And Stilianov, they were looking for ways out, Mike. They were like wrestlers looking for the big fat geezer in a leotard at ringside to tag them, to get them out of the ring. I swear, if it had been 4-3s then, not 4-2s, 4-3s, I have a feeling Amir might have walked through that with 4th round stoppages. That was the engine the kid had.
And you talk about Mario Kinderland, Steve, he'd won gold 4 years earlier in Sydney as well, one of the great Cubans. And he remains to this day, Steve, one of the greatest boxers that I've ever seen. But picking up on another memory, Steve, I'm going to stick to the very same day that De La Hoya fought back in Barcelona in 1992 and won his Olympic gold medal. That was at a time when there was no women's boxing. It would be 20 years before women's boxing was introduced into the Olympic Games, but they had 6 finals on the Saturday and 6 finals on the Sunday. And also on the Saturday, when De La Hoya fought, the 2 Irishmen fought, Steve, one from the south, one from the north. Michael Carruth won gold at welterweight against a Cuban, Juan Hernandez, who, I can't remember the exact figure, Steve, but it was something like he'd been unbeaten in 142 bouts, and Michael Carruth beat him. And there were so many Irish fans in the basketball arena where the boxing took place. It was one of the greatest occasions in terms of the atmosphere. And Wayne McCulloch won a silver medal in the bantamweight division, and he was beaten by another Cuban, Yoel Casamayor. So again, that thread of greatness seeping through. Juan Hernandez never turned pro, but Yoel Casamayor was one of those Cubans who defected and did turn pro, and so we saw his greatness in the professional ranks as well. But that was just an amazing day, Steve, to see those two Irish medals and to see Oscar de la Hoya. On my first experience of Olympic boxing finals, it was truly remarkable.
Carruth's victory was tight and close. I remember watching that back a few years ago. There was an anniversary and I managed to get hold of Carruth. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, he was a bit fortunate there. Watching it back, that could have gone either way. There was no problem with that. And as for Wayne McCulloch, I have no idea how he gets his heart and guts inside his tiny frame. Casamayor, I had an Olympic experience with Casamayor, Mike. It was X-rated, so to speak. In Atlanta, Casamayor just jumped over the wall, if you remember right. Literally, no, I'm not using John le Carre style language here. He was in Mexico, I think, at a training camp, and him and Raymond Garbe jumped over the wall dressed as women and escaped, if you remember rightly. And they ended up turning professional with a I'm going to use this word. I've always wanted to use this expression, with a Cuban outfit. Sounds like something from Gangland America in the 50s. They turned professional with a Cuban outfit based in Florida, and that Cuban outfit arranged a very cheeky press conference on about the second day of the boxing in a big bar, sort of sports bar, just down the road from the boxing in Atlanta, which was in a sorrowful arena, horrible old arena. And I remember I went to this thing and it was really vicious, Mike, because the pro-Castro press were there and the pro-Castro coaches and all of those odd men that always around the Cuban teams, no matter what sport you're in. The guys who are meant to be coaches, but that's the first time they ever put on a lycra tracksuit. And they were there, Mike, and then the anti-Castro guys were there with Casamayor, and it was a really nasty war of words, and there was a scuffle and a gun fell out of someone's pocket. And I was sitting there, it was about 10 o'clock, I had loads of time for deadline, plus there were 3 Bloody Marys, and there was breakfast. I've got Cuban Olympic champions, I've got guns on the floor, I've got time on my side, I've got a Bloody Mary, which I better stop drinking, and I've got a breakfast. Hey-ho, only at the Olympics, brother, only at the Olympics.
And on that note, Steve, we've had an email from Jamie Ingleby, one of our regular listeners, and he says that the post-Castro evolution of Cuban boxing will be interesting to observe with such a rich history in the Olympics. Will the Cuban focus on the games remain? How will it evolve? Will the outlawing of professional boxing be overturned? All issues moving forward that the Cubans will have to address. Their team for Tokyo is highly experienced and will no doubt have a degree of success, but hardly has the young, exciting feel that previous teams have had from Cuba. They were second in the medals table in Rio in 2016. Professional boxing and amateur boxing are very different, and being successful in one doesn't mean you'll automatically succeed in the other. And it is interesting, Steve, that the Cubans have managed to hold on to, if not their dominance, certainly their authority in recent games, and we're seeing the feed into the professional ranks, whether it's by defection or other means, that they do manage to make that transition in most cases.
It's actually a tiny sporting miracle, Mike, that after, I mentioned in that Casamayor story, that after 25 solid years of orchestrated defections at a time when a Cuban boxer was one of the world's the most expensive commodities, to be honest with you, for smuggling out of Cuba. Some of the prices we've heard with drug boats collecting boxers in bays and dropping them off in different parts of Miami. I mean, all of these stories, these are not tales, these are true. It's amazing after 25 years of hard defections that they still have got basically this hold on what we used to call amateur boxing. It's a miracle, Mike. It's genius.
And now we're going to get on to the British prospects in Tokyo for the Olympic Games. Great success dating back to 2008 in Beijing, 2012 in London when Britain finished top of the boxing medals table, and again successes in 2016. And we've been talking to various members of the GB squad, the men's and women's teams, in recent weeks. And if you want to hear those interviews, then just go back onto BBC Sounds and trawl back through our most recent 3 or 4 podcasts. And we're going to hear today from 2 more medal prospects, Ben Whittaker in a moment. But first of all, Siobhan Clarke, who's Britain's qualifier in the heavyweight division. Remember, there is also a super heavyweight division. We heard from Fraser Clarke a few weeks back. Siobhan Clarke in at heavyweight, a man who who walked away from boxing after representing Jamaica at the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, where he was beaten in his first contest in the light heavyweight division. Now, as I say, he's up at heavyweight. He returned to the sport in 2016, very quickly won a place on the GB squad in Sheffield. And when we were there, Steve, to talk to the team, you got into a bit of debate about clothing.
So, Mike, it's simple. It's a beige safari suit. I've got one in green and I've got one in red, but the red one's special. Basically, it's a jacket, buttons up the front, and it can be long sleeve or short sleeve with buttons. There's no zips on a safari suit. And it's got to have at least 4 pockets. Now, those 4 pockets can either be buttoned down or they can just be open. They're beautiful, they're versatile, and they are very much what you have to wear, I'm convinced, when you're talking to athletes, Mike. Steve Bunce safari suits. They're not available yet, but when they are, I'll let you know, son.
Well, suffice to say, Steve, Siobhan Clarke was impressed for sure.
Listen, Bunce is swaggerific. Listen, he makes young boys look out of. I mean, you're doing well.
You know what it is we've got a great friend, Mike and I, called Gene Kilroy, who was Muhammad Ali's business manager. And Gene gives me all these pictures that have never been seen of Ali and Foreman at the Rumble in the Jungle. And they're all wearing what we called safari suits. So I've spent about the last 10 years trying to acquire a safari suit, because you can't buy a safari suit, you can only pull it off. So what I'm pulling off is not just a bit of swag, it's a Rumble in the Jungle swag as well, Chev. You understand me?
You know what I mean? Historic swag.
I think I'll leave now. I feel suitably endorsed.
On that point, though, Chev, how far back do you dig into the past for inspiration, or do you?
Sugar Ray Robinson. He's actually, I don't like to say I have a favourite boxer, but he's my top 3. He's my top 3 boxers of all time. Like, just way ahead of his time. Just the combinations, the angles, the swag. Because a lot of people don't know that's where Muhammad Ali got their old pretty boy stuff and the talk and all of that, you know. So I'm not a boxing historian, but I know a little bit.
But if you do look at the old black and white films going through from the 30s then to the 40s, suddenly you see Sugar Ray Robinson, and it's like a different sport almost to what's gone before. He just absolutely takes it to another dimension. And if you look at football films or cricket films from the 1940s and 50s, it looks so different.
Yeah.
But Sugar Ray Robinson could be dropped into today and wouldn't look any different.
The real TBE, if we're putting ad-libs out there, TBE. But a lot of people won't know that because of, you know, the media and stuff now. They just focus on now rather than shedding light on what was then. But yeah, he was way ahead of his time.
So, but before you went out to Paris, there was a couple of tournaments in different places, not major tournaments, but different tournaments. How long was your actual break from your last fight in 2019 through to your first fight in 2021? Do you know how many months it was?
I think it was 15 months. 15? Yeah, roughly around that.
But how did you deal with all those empty, dead months? Because, you know, you're in London at the qualifier last March, you're ready to go, then it's gone. And then it's April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January. That's like 7-8 months. How did you deal and cope with that? The absence of the gym, the absence of a tournament, not knowing if Tokyo was going to happen. How are you dealing with that?
I think first and foremost, I had some donuts, you know, the day that they decided everything was going to go down. There was a really nice donut shop outside. I bought 4 donuts and I had them on the way home on the train. It was me and Lee Pullen, actually. But once we got home, like for the first day, I was like, oh man, like waited all this time and now it's gone. And then GB Boxing was on the phone and they did everything to make sure us guys were comfortable at home, from sending out bikes, bags, training equipment, whatever we need, we had it, and we were still training. Might not been at full capacity, but we was still. There is an Olympics next year. That was the mentality all the way through, you know. And yeah, we did well. You know, I was riding around with Boatsy on the bike, Joshua Boatsy.
Yeah, I saw some of that footage.
I was riding around on the bike. Yeah, it was great times, man. I really got to learn a bit of the countryside of Kent. Well, me and him both, and it was really good. And you know, in the later stages, we heard that, you know, things were definitely going to happen, and we got to come back here, you know, under restrictive conditions for safety. But everything was good, man. And then the guys behind the scenes, I can't remember the actual names of the people behind the scenes, but they made sure that we was able to travel in the end. So to our first competition this year in February, I think it was, we was able to travel because there was not a lot of countries that could travel, and these guys were working behind the scenes to make that happen, and we've got 11 athletes qualified.
Still a long time to wait to travel while professional boxing got back underway. Was there ever a temptation to wander over to the paid ranks while you were away?
No disrespect to anybody that's a professional boxing, but anybody can be a pro as long as you pass the test. How many people can say they've been to an Olympics, and then how many can say they've made an Olympics? So I look at things differently.
And you look up at these posters all around the gym that you come to every day, and maybe you'll be up there sometime soon.
You know, when you first walk in here and you see the guys on the wall, and you're like, yo, wow. And there's a picture over there that said, this could be you. You know, you look at that every day and you just imagine being there. So hopefully, you know, with all the work that's been invested, the dividends will pay back nicely.
That qualifier, the Olympic qualifier in Paris, 5 or 6 days or whatever it was over, and there's a lot of pressure on all of you to go out there. I know there's a couple of guys that were already there. Peter McGraw and Galau had already qualified, and probably Lauren was going to go through if she'd have lost her first fight, that type of stuff. But it seems to me that, and from seeing you up here over the last 18 months, that you created a sort of team spirit there. There's almost like you were invincible, that you were all going to win, that it was your right. It was almost like all we had to do was get in there, fight to our best ability, and we'd go. Was there that sense? Was that sense of team spirit, yeah?
You said over the last 18 months, but I think it's just over the last 5 years. I mean, starting with 2017 at the European Championships, we brought back. I can't
McGraw's gold.
We brought we brought back, I think, 7 medals or 8 medals. Well, anyway, we brought back record medals ever. Do you know what I mean? That's never been done before. Went to the Commonwealth Games, we brought back the most medals ever. The World Championships, the most ever in a quarterfinals. You know, and these things ain't spoken about, but they've been happening. And when you look at the guys around here, I don't think any of the boys sell each other dreams. Like, if you didn't perform well, you didn't perform well. And it's just competing against the best in the world. We're just like, yo, from what the staff say, going away, like back in the, let's say like the 90s or whatever, GB was the punch bag for everybody else. But now when we go around, we know that they're scared. Like, nobody wants to draw us, and that's not a big-headed thing. That's just everybody's grafted. And being here every day, we've grafted and made it worth it.
That's interesting, because we hear stories of old from those days that you're talking about of almost a losing mentality permeating a hotel. You spoke about being there like hamsters. If people are coming back day in, day out, winning, that creates a very different mindset for you than if they're coming back and losing. It gives you that belief, even though it's an individual sport.
It's the psychology that goes on when you're in that situation is crazy, right? Because when we go away, right, everybody wins. Like, it's just almost a thing of all the guys are gonna win their first fight, right? So it's like it's not competition, but it's like you don't want to be that first person to lose.
First man out.
Yeah, you know. So I think it's a little bit of a pressure, but it's more of a like, we're that good, we can do it kind of thing, rather than, oh man, it just boosts you. And everybody, even though it's individual, we're all backing each other. Do you know what I mean? People will give you a little tip here or a little tip there, what they think, you know. And then while you're fighting, those guys are shouting information at you. So it's amazing, man. It's great to be a part of.
You know, picking up on something you said there about that loser mentality. Well, I don't think it was a loser mentality. I think that was just the way it was. And I always tell a story. You might have heard it already. So if I have, you'd have to just listen to it again. I'm sorry. These guys have to listen to my stories at least twice anyway. But there's that famous night at the Lancaster Hotel where Young England are fighting Young East Germany. And I go along. It's about 84, 85. So I I've got a couple of friends who are in the team, and they're not in the change room. They've all gone down to the toilets. There's this massive toilet in a fancy hotel, and they're all standing in front of sinks. They're bunched together in front of 8 sinks. And Kevin Hickey was there, the national coach, and he's splashing them with ice. And I'm thinking, oh, terrific, getting him in the mood. He's splashing them with ice, and some of the boys are jumping on there, bouncing around. And then Hickey says, as he turns to them, he said, remember, boys, he said, I don't know what happens. He said, I've got the towel, and if you're in trouble, I'll throw the towel in. That was the pep talk. That was the pep talk, man.
Yeah.
And listen, Kevin Hickey won't deny it, because that was that's what happened.
Yeah.
We boxed. I'll whisper it. We boxed East Germany in the 70s and 80s, and we didn't lose 12-0. If we got it to 10-1, or God forbid we got it to 9-3, that was a result, son. A result.
There was a boxer who used to fight for the Repton Club in East London, Billy Taylor, a featherweight. He got selected for the 72 Olympics, yeah. In his first multi-nations international, it was against East Germany, who was so strong at the time. And he said that once he realised he got drawn against East Germany, he spent the whole of the first round trying to headbutt him so he'd get disqualified. So he could get out of there.
I think the mentality is very much different. I mean, when Galal fought Russia, was it Russia in Russia? No, he fought the Cuban in Russia. Done a job on the Cuban. Like people are genuinely scared. And our guy, our little champion, we have to say little champion because he's a little man. But he went out there and he did a job. And I think the Cuban was an Olympic medalist, right? And these guys, it's just very, very, very small margins, man. Our teams come on very, very well.
Great stuff. Well, look, we wish you all the best in Tokyo, Chev. Great to talk to you again.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Siobhan Clark referring there to Galal Yafai, who's qualified in the flyweight division. Britain have an entrant in 7 of the 8 men's divisions. Each country allowed only 1 entrant per weight division, and there are 4 British entrants in the women's events in the 5 weights. So only 1 weight missing in terms of the men's and women's teams. And Steve, from the results that we saw at the recent European qualifier, that's enough to suggest that there are a number of medal prospects within the GB squad. And we'll talk about them individually after we've heard from Ben Whittaker. But going back to that day that we spent there in Sheffield, we were so impressed by the different characters involved. And although it's very much an individual sport, there was a very strong team ethic there, and that came through in that interview with Siobhan, didn't it?
Yeah, we also got a flavour of that when we sat Galal Yafai down and Fraser Clark down, separated by about 8 or 9 stone and about 7 or 8 inches, but inseparable. In many ways, it was great to hear from them just a couple of weeks ago. Mike, what it is, I mean, he talked about it there, Siobhan, and I'd mentioned it already, this whole idea that they were so close. No other sport suffered like boxing. No other sport was taken so close to the very edge and then told, hold on, we're not sure if it's happening. 2 men had qualified last year at the Olympic qualifier in London, and another 3 or 4 were due to qualify in the next 2 or 3 days. A teenage girl, Caroline Dubois, was 19 years of age and 15 hours away from her Olympic qualification contest when she found out the whole thing had been scuppered. I tell you what, they were under a lot of pressure, these young, vulnerable athletes. Mike, they had to wait, not just a month or 2, they had to wait a full 14 or 15 months before that qualification process happened. And as Chev mentioned there, the GB system was brilliant, it was immaculate. It sent out bikes, it sent out regimes, it sent out dietary supplements, it sent out bags and equipment. It kept them going. They're the real heroes here, Mike. It's the nameless people. Even Chev said, I don't know who they are. I don't know all their names. They kept this machine grinding on. And in Paris, this team was they were like juggernauts, Mike. They ripped through that Parisian, that qualification tournament. They absolutely destroyed it. They're in the best possible form. And you remember you and I were talking to Robert McCracken, the national GB coach, former professional and great old friend of ours. And he kind of acknowledged that in a bizarre way, the delay in that Paris tournament was the ideal preparation for what's going to be beginning at about 2 a.m. this Saturday morning.
And another very impressive competitor at that European qualifier in Paris only last month was Ben Whittaker at light heavyweight. He moved up from middleweight in 2019 and immediately found improvement. Later that year, he won a bronze medal at the World Championships in Russia. We've been hearing from various squad members over the past few weeks about their different roles within the squad. And Ben's been telling us about his.
I am the pretty boy of the gang.
Ask a silly question.
Ben, we haven't asked anyone this, and we've talked to just about every single boxer today, and I'm amazed we haven't asked anyone yet, Mike.
That's your fault.
No, it's probably I'll take the blame for everything, or young Jack will take the blame. At what point in the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years did you start to dream about being an Olympic boxer, Ben? Can you remember what it was and what maybe inspired it?
That's a very good question. I hear a lot of people say it's their dream since a young kid, but truthfully it wasn't for me. Or actually, let me rearrange that. It was, but it wasn't boxing. It was maybe sprinting, things like that. So watching the Usain Bolts, and I thought, this is class. But then when I got into this squad, I won the ABAs, got into the squad. They all sit you down on the side of the ring, and there was like, you've got 4 years. One of you in this group will be an Olympian. And I thought, this is a bit like school, this, you know what I mean? Because they said that at school, next thing you know, I'm 24, so it goes real quick. But they said, the years will fly by, and whatever you do, if you put the work in, you will be on that wall. And I thought, you know what? I wouldn't mind giving it a go. I got on just when 2016 was happening, so I was sparring Boatsi, Fowler and whatnot, and seeing what they're going through, I thought, okay, it's quite good, this. So I took it step by step, went to all the majors, went to all the little tournaments, and what can I say? I'm at the doorstep now.
How key for you, Ben, was the move up from middleweight to light heavy? And just listening to what you're saying there about earlier on a lack of confidence, was that lack of confidence behind waiting to move up?
Yeah. So that's the thing. When I first got on the squad, walked in, 18, 75 kilos, skinny, looked like a little beanpole. And the coach went, you'll be light heavyweight. I went, no way, I don't want to be going up there. But then your body starts developing with S&C and whatnot. And your energy just starts depleting. You have to think, as the pro game, it's the day before weighing. You can afford to make that weight. But amateur boxing, sometimes you're fighting in 5 days. You have to make the weight each and every day, and you don't enjoy it then. What I do now, I'm 81 kilogram, but I walk around at 82 kilogram. People might think it's light, but I enjoy it. I go in the ring, I don't have to shed weight the next day, and my performances show that it was a benefit moving up.
In terms of what the Olympics can do for you, you look around at the posters here and the great names that have achieved for Great Britain. And one of the coaches here, Richie Woodall, winning bronze in 1988, fought Roy Jones at the Games. And look what Roy Jones went on to do. The Olympics can be a platform for greatness.
Exactly, you hit the nail on the head there. Hopefully I'll come back and be a pop star, end up on Strictly Come Dancing.
It's easier, isn't it? Sorry,
exactly.
I'll throw that out there, it's easier.
But exactly, hopefully I'll be on all of them, MasterChef, whatnot. But 100%, it's the gateway to opening up many doors for you. Obviously, I want to go pro after this maybe, but this is the stepping stone where a medal can change everything for you.
You want to go pro, given your roots, the Commonwealth Games next year, close to home in Birmingham?
Of course, it's an option in my head, Birmingham. It's on my doorstep, but you never know what can happen. But we'll just keep the door open and see what happens.
Ben, can I ask you one last one? Thanks I really appreciate you hanging around. Last year, had the qualifiers gone through, it would have finished on, the 18th of March. Then you would have had an awful long wait before the Olympics. You'd have all had that massive bonding experience where you're up against it, the most important fight of your life. Has it in some kind of bizarre way? Will it be beneficial? The fact that by the time you get to the Olympics, you'd only be 6 weeks or so since you were all in Paris, all having breakfast, all wishing each other. Do you think that might that have somehow, in a bizarre way of might help you in the Olympics, Ben? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a blessing in disguise, really, because it was a weird one. It was like we had a big period of not fighting, then London was coming up for the qualifiers, then next thing you know, you got Tokyo. Obviously got stopped there with COVID. But it's been a weird one. We went to Serbia about 4 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago went to Paris. And now we're going to Tokyo. So we were all sharp. I think it's worked out beneficial. And not only that, we've had a year to develop, know our bodies more, work little things we might not have wanted to work. So I think that's with everybody though, all around the world. They've had a year to get better. So you'll see a lot of people shine when probably a year ago they might not have. So you just got to look behind yourself for those underdogs, because everyone's going to try and come and get it now.
Great stuff, Ben, and good luck in Tokyo, mate. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
And just picking up on the theme there, Steve, from Ben Whittaker, Britain's light heavyweight entrant at the Olympics in Tokyo, about Strictly Come Dancing, about MasterChef, and what might be out there for those that go on to find success in the professional ranks. Who are we thinking might be those likely candidates? So let's look through the team, and it's worth just listing who the team is. In the men's event, as I said, there are 8 weight divisions, and Britain have qualified boxers in 7 of those. Galal Yafai at flyweight, Peter McGrail at featherweight, who won a bronze medal at the World Championships in 2019. The twins Luke and Pat McCormack. Pat won a silver medal at the World Championships, so that's solid form. Ben, who we've just heard from, Siobhan Clark, who was with us earlier in the show, and the super heavyweight who was on the podcast a few weeks back, Fraser Clark. So let's deal with the men's events first of all, Steve. I mentioned those results at the most recent World Championships where Pat McCormack won a silver, Peter McGrail and Ben Whittaker won bronzes. Those are the best form lines in terms of global championships. I know it was 2 years ago, but the personnel haven't really changed. For example, Pat McCormack was beaten on a cut in that final, although it did go to points as it stood in the second round when he was stopped by the Russian Andrei Zamkovoy. But he boxed Zamkovoy and beat him in the recent European qualifier. So my long-winded point, Steve, is that those results we saw recently, very impressive results at the European qualifier, augur well for Tokyo, because any boxer who qualifies from any country from the European zone, Steve, it's my argument, has at least a medal prospect.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I'm a bit surprised, and I had to check with the people that run so-called Olympic amateur boxing at the moment, that only one of our 7 men are seeded, and that's Pat McCormack. He's seeded at number 1, so that gives him, in theory, a better chance of not drawing another seed in the opening round. In fact, no chance of drawing another seed in the opening round. Mike, I'm going to say what I said before London, and I say what I said before Rio. I've been writing about Olympic boxers and doing Olympic previews since 1988 in Seoul, when I delivered the Boxing News Olympic preview to all the boxers, including Richie Woodall, you mentioned, down at Crystal Palace, where they were training at the time. So I've been talking about it then. And back then, Mike, sometimes the best you could say was, about a boxer, well, he's sponsored by a betting firm and he got a bronze medal at the Acropolis Cup. Well, we don't say that kind of stuff now. We say he got a bronze at the Europeans, a silver at the Worlds, a Commonwealth Games gold. He didn't lose a round. He's this, he's that. He's a part Olympian. Mike, I've got to think that our total medal haul is not going to be 2 or 3. I'm going high. I'm going 5 to 6 or 7 medals. And that's even with bad draws. In the men, you have to fancy Pat McCormack to get a medal. I'm convinced Fraser Clark will get a medal. Ben Whittaker will get a medal. Ben Whittaker, Mike, by the way, had he not gone to Paris, he still would have received an invite to the Olympics because of his world ranking. So that's how, we're saying things here that we haven't been able to say about GB teams. Well, ever. Peter McGraw, on form, you have to fancy him to nick a medal. Galal Yafai's beaten several of the men who you would put inside the top 4 or 5. Mike, they don't even need that much luck with the draw. They just need a little tiny bit of luck. I fancy 4 or 5 of the men to nick a medal, led by Pat McCormack, Big Fraser and Ben.
5 women's weights being contested this time, Steve, and Britain have qualified in 4 of those weight divisions. Charlie Davison, the great story down at flyweight, who left the sport for a long time, had 3 children, is now back and boxing beautifully. Caroline Dubois, a great young talent in the lightweight division. In between those 2 weights, Caris Artingstall, who won a bronze at the most recent World Championships, like the men in 2019. And then the gold medalist from Wales at those World Championships at middleweight, Lauren Price. And when we talk about looking forward to the professional ranks, Steve, when you think of what Savannah Marshall is doing and has only just become a world champion, Claressa Shields from the United States claiming to be the best boxer in the world, male or female, then Lauren Price, as we spoke to her on the pod a few weeks ago, has that, if you like, in her sights. She has so much to aim for and will want to go into the professional ranks with that gold medal as her bargaining chip.
Second of our seeded boxers, and like Pat McCormack, seeded at number 1. Mike, she needs to get a massive cut and to not win. It's really that simple. Even women in there that she's had tussles with. She's playing with these people, and she's not even a middleweight. She's only a light middleweight or a welterweight, to be perfectly honest. It's neither here nor there. Lauren Price, I think, romps it. And remember, Caroline Dubois, who is now 20, she lost in the final in Paris, Mike, having won, I think, 3 times. She lost in the final in Paris to the woman from Harrington, from Kelly Harrington from Ireland, who seeded at number 1. And there was not a lot in that final. It was a tight, hard, close final. So you've got to fancy those two. It's a dream. It's a dream situation in many ways. Can the real story of the games, can the mum of 3, can she pull it off? Can she do just the most ridiculous of things and pull this off? Who knows, Mike? And that's for Carrie Stall in a 50-50 race, and it's all 50-50. She's in a great tournament, Mike. She can come through. She's a fitness freak. She's been in with the top women in the world. She's lost on points with them in the Europeans and the world. Mike, again, how are you going to tip against? Hear me out. Let me ask you this question. Can you tip against any of this 11 strongly, like you could in 96, in 92, in 88, and 84? Can you tip strongly, and even in 2008, can you tip strongly against any of these 11 boxers?
No, you can't, Stephen. I think you made a very valid point to Ben Whittaker there in the interview that we've just heard about the European qualifier happening only a few weeks ago. Because, for example, the Asian qualifier and the African qualifier happened in the very early part of last year, 2020, 18 months ago. Now, I'm not saying those nations haven't had access to top quality competitions since then, but top quality tournament competitions, Steve, where you're making weight 3, 4, 5 times in a very short space of time. I think what happened at the European qualifiers augurs well for Britain's prospects at the Olympic Games, because they've had that, if you like, that sharpening experience, Steve, to get themselves in the very best of form, so close to the championships, so close to the Olympics in this particular case. One more point, Steve, before we leave to talk about the professional ranks. No crowds this time around. How are you sensing that might have an effect, if any? I just want to give you one single quote, Steve, from an experience that I'm using in athletics, which I'm going to cover, and will be very different for the athletes, because I know you're going to say that the boxers are used to competing in empty arenas. But at the last World Championships in athletics in Doha in Qatar in 2019, it was very poorly attended, very badly organised in the first few days in terms of getting crowds in. But an American called Sam Kendricks won the pole vault, and in the wake of a storm of criticism that there weren't crowds turning up for the showpiece event of athletics outside of the Olympic Games, he said, "Let me change the question. Do you go to the competition seeking the competition, or do you go to the competition seeking more people to scream your name?" And I think that kind of individual focus, Steve, that narrow tunnel of focus is what the British boxers will find when they get to Tokyo, and will be able to reproduce their best performances because they've been used to it.
And Mike, if they weren't used to it by the time they started touring those 5 or 6 countries they went to early this year, February, March of this year, in preparation for Paris, they will be used to it now. But they are used to it. This is what events are like. That's what you were referring to there. When you go to a world championship somewhere odd and somewhere bizarre, and there's 2 rings up, there's no atmosphere. You remember even in London last year, Mike, for the Olympic qualifier, when there were 2 rings, you could hear a pin drop, and that was pre-COVID. And you've been at, and I've been at, I remember going famously to Plovdiv in Bulgaria to watch the European Championships with 2 rings up. And, you can hear a pin drop, Mike. You could hear anything. You can hear everything in the corner. It's what they're used to. However, these guys have been extra charged with that, because as Siobhan Clark talked about there, they felt like hamsters on some kind of wheel. They're used to the loneliness, Mike. They're used to the silence. They're not stupid. They know it's there. They know that they're going to be fighting in front of basically a couple of friends and some officials who don't give a monkeys about them. But you know what, Mike? They'll know somewhere that there are thousands, millions cheering on, hopefully listening to me and Overs at 3 a.m. in the morning for God's sake. That's what I'm hoping, anyway.
Yeah, I can't wait, Steve. And it's fascinating to look back at results over the last few years and the past 20 years. The Americans, Steve, who for so long, along with the Cubans, dominated Olympic boxing and amateur boxing have won just the one gold medal in the last 20 years in the men's boxing events, and that was for Andre Ward back in 2004. Deontay Wilder won a bronze in 2008, and that brings us on to the subject that we visited last week, Steve, the third fight against Tyson Fury. And since we were on air last week, it's been confirmed that that third fight will happen as expected on October the 9th now at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. And Wesley Simpson has emailed in to say, I just wanted to touch base and get your thoughts surrounding the current situation between Wilder and Fury. When he was writing, it was off. It's now back on. Based on Dillian White's comments, do you think they should make Tyson Fury a champion in recess and order White versus Wilder for that date and for that title, or just order White versus Wilder for the interim title? Well, that's moved on, Steve, because we now have this fight. But the wider point that Wesley's making is about the chances of Dillian White ever getting a world title fight. And it does seem to be receding with each passing month. But Fury versus Wilder happens. If Joshua versus Usyk happens, then maybe sometime next year we do finally get to see Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua. And then at some stage down the line, Dillian White will get his chance. What I don't want to see, Steve, is him winning one of the offshoots, one of the interim titles, one of the gold, one of these fancy belts that they just dream up a name for just to give Dillian White a belt. I want to see him get a chance at the proper World Heavyweight Championship.
Well, Mike, you're dreaming, and Wes, I've got some harsh news for you. Nobody out there is going to order anything. Hey, listen, they're going to fight hopefully in October. If they don't fight then, Dillian's going to get something down the line. We need to sort this out, Mike. It's an insult to fans. It's an insult to everybody. And as I said last week, everybody's pointing a finger at everybody else and blaming everybody else. What more does Dillian White have to do? He's done this, he's done that. And people will say, yeah, but he said no to $5 million to fight Joshua X, Y, and Z. I go, yeah, he said no because he was worth $15 million, and he's proven that, and that's the sort of money that's out there. Let's take one day at a time, as they say in that spiritual, Mike. Let's take one day at a time. Let's get Usyk and Joshua in the ring. Let's get Wilder and Fury in the ring. Let's find out what's going to happen there. Let's find out if anybody in a sanctioning body's got any guts, Guts, and let's find out if Dillian gets a crack, or if Joe Joyce, who we're going to talk about in a second, gets a crack. Oh, come on, just give us something that resembles the way a sport should be run.
Yeah, Joe Joyce, as you say, Steve, 5 years on now from his silver medal success at the Rio Olympics, is flying in the professional ranks. Next weekend, on Saturday, he faces Carlos Takam at Wembley Arena, and again we see the Olympic link. Joe Joyce winning silver, as I said, in 2016. Takam represented Cameroon in Athens back in 2004, was beaten on points in his first contest by a man from Egypt called Muhammad Ali, who went on to reach the final, but withdrew from the final. And the final was won by a certain Alexander Povetkin. We look at Takam, Steve. His last 4 defeats going back to 2014 have been against Povetkin in the pro ranks, against Joseph Parker, Anthony Joshua and Derek Chisora. So those form lines, even though Takam is now on a winning run of 4, is a kind of a yardstick for Joyce. And it's a fight that at this stage, if he's going where he says he's going, he has to win.
For a 13th fight, it's ideal. Let's get that absolutely right. It's absolutely ideal. Takam's not getting bashed up by people that he should be beating. He's still losing to good men, and he's putting up a lot of resistance until he's beaten. I've got to be honest with you. I think it's an ideal fight for the 13th. Where it fits in the grand scheme of maybe a rematch with Daniel Dubois, and where it fits in the grand scheme with him getting a WBO title fight, which of course he was, allegedly guaranteed last November, by May of this year. Where any of that fits in, who knows? I can't solve that, Mike. I'm not that smart, my friend. I'm swaggerific, as Siobhan Clark called me, but I'm not a genius.
And just briefly looking back at the weekend's event, Steve, a fight we looked forward to last week, which was for the 4 belts in the super welterweight division, all 4 of them. So an historic occasion in San Antonio in Texas, ended in a draw between Jamel Charlo and Brian Castaño of Argentina. A fantastic fight, Steve. I have to say, a better fight than I thought. And the rematch will be one of the highlights of 2021 as well, if they can finally get pen to paper.
Yeah, Castaño, I think what happened, Mike, I think we might have underestimated him. I was a bit harsh on him last week. Sorry about that. It often happens with Argentinians. It was a terrific scrap, a terrific fight, but then what becomes the story of the fight is one of the scorecards, Mike.
Yeah, Nelson Vasquez had it by 6 rounds to Charlo, whereas the other 2 judges had it by respectively 1 round to Castaño, and the last judge had it absolutely level. But we talk about Olympic pedigree, Steve, and amateur pedigree. Castaño, if you look back at his form, he beat Errol Spence in the qualifiers for the 2011 Pan American Games and forced him to take 2 counts as well. So there you've got the amateur pedigree again infiltrating the professional ranks, and that's what makes, Steve, what we're about to watch in Tokyo, what you're about to watch very closely, so exciting, because you are getting a glimpse into boxing's future.
Mike, every time I go to an amateur show, even if it's 11-year-olds, one of the things I always tell people is keep the program. Keep the program, because you never know one day. When you go to the Olympics or the World Championships or the Europeans, you look through it. I take any page from, 96, 2000, 2004, 2008, any page, point your finger on it, touch it what you like. Oh, there's a 22-year-old Golovkin winning in Athens in the fight immediately after Amir Khan. You can't go wrong with it. It's pedigree. It's what we do. It's studying form. It's that simple. In any other sport, real sport, like horse racing, we'd be called normal. People look at us like there's something wrong with you and I, because we collect things like that and we talk about things like that. We look at form from the European Junior Championships. For God's sake, Mike, that's what it is. Those are the men and women we're going to be talking about in 4, 6, 8 and 10 and 12 years' time. You've got to follow and study form.
Well, I kept a programme, Steve, from an amateur bill at the Cat's Whiskers Ballroom in Streatham in South East London from 1974, I think it was, with a certain Costello and Bunce on the card. What happened to them? Or is that about as much used as a bingo card now?
No, listen, that's not. I've got one of them. I got sent it anonymously about 5 years ago. I've got an original one. It's even got a bit of food on it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was something exotic and chicken. And Bunce and Costello were on the bill, weighing about combined weight of about 11 stone, soaking wet, by the way.
Oh, glory days, Steve. Well, as I was saying earlier in the show, I'm heading off now to Tokyo on Thursday to cover the athletics there. I've got barrel loads of homework to do between now and then, and very much missing out on the boxing this time around. But Steve and Jonathan Overend will be keeping across everything that happens boxing-wise in Tokyo, and there will be regular podcasts on this same feed all the way through the Olympic boxing. So keep an eye out and an ear out for the alerts. Steve and Jonathan Overend will be across everything that's important as far as boxing is concerned at the Tokyo Olympics. I'll be back on Monday, August the 16th, to look back on the Olympics and to look back on my first experience with DAZN at the Matchroom Fight Camp. But until then, that's it from 5 Live Boxing with Costello and Bunce.
Let's get ready to rumble!
5 Live Boxing. How